there was a powerful understanding.
No, not between 1910 and 1915. That's not the case, which is John by the way. But you know, the things that became part of Kahnweiler's goods became part of the French state's goods during the war, so we know exactly what the situation was.
Sure, to go beyond.
I don't want to get too technical about it, but it is the case that Kahnweiler was in fact a watershed. It's not that there was always the same thing.
Well, I don't know. Actually,
there was a very specific thing that happened there in between Kahnweiler and Fleckheim and the writing of those contracts.
Sure, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with Paul Klee and German occupation and all the rest of it. Sure, it's a massive. You could even argue that Paul Klee's whole career was based on the war. But what I'm getting at to is actually Pierre Matisse, who was a very interesting dealer, and the result of his occupation, Matisse's son in New York, and the relationship and impact this had on people like Giacometti and various other artists was enormous. But what I'd like to say is to leave Paris of the 1940s, go back to the Medici, and the situation that we have of value and merchandising in the Renaissance, because what we have there is a fascinating situation where a pope like Julius or Innocent X will commission the ceiling, the Last Judgment from Michelangelo, but he's not going to sell it on. You know, this is not merchandise. This isn't something like a situation anywhere near Jack Koons and Versailles. This is a situation where they know, the Medici are the banks as well, they position themselves very well. They know very well that in the Republic, Plato is suggesting that there will be a philosopher prince, a philosopher king, and that if they position themselves with Plato, they can effectively smokescreen or disguise themselves as powerful monarchs or princes of Florence. So it's a way of, by positioning or nurturing Michelangelo, you could say that this was a method, this was a very effective method becoming dominant, not only as bankers, but dominant cultural icons of their time. But then you get someone like Savonarola who comes along, who's read Thomas Aquinas and Plato and knows exactly what's going on and tries to dismantle the situation. So if you go beyond value in terms of, you know, Kahnweiler and the dealing and which also ran into Robert Scull and the whole thing that was going on with back in the 60s and 70s. You go back to what value meant then. You have to go beyond merchandise, and you start thinking in terms of the severe, powerful propaganda of what it actually means in terms of value of the Medici. So it's a huge area.
I think it's all propaganda.
Sure.
Whether it goes through the turmoil of merchandise or not, it all ends up with propaganda.
But is that bad?
And
this is the thing.
And well, it's not. You know, I think you know, the Medici were bankers and they fell. The popes fell. You know, and I take your point that, you know, there was huge intent. There was huge directed intent. There you can see it. There was no secret. I mean, you know, it wasn't even Raphael who was doing the Disputa. The story of the Disputa is really Tommaso Ingrani. It's a particular philosopher that the Pope puts forward for it. You know, I mean, you're right. That's probably closer to Versace because that's closer to advertising. Yes.
Does everyone on the panel agree? Well, maybe not that art is all and only propaganda, that it has a propaganda function. If so, I mean, it's an interesting question what it is that contemporary art is propagandizing. I mean, is it simply Gloria Sarchi? I don't know.
It's not the artist doing it. It's not the art, it's the use of it. Let's get back to the bottled water. I mean, it's not the art itself. I think that there is something there. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's the use of it, and I mean, so far, I think was brought up had this very, I mean, quite negative side of the very people part, but that's not only it. And when you use the word propaganda, I mean, of course, everything is propaganda. There is this very strong thing at the moment that they're working in the past, and that's something we have to go on with. But there isn't only this, and when I think that we're talking to students in art and future artists, I think there is this kind of very contemporary subject, issues and debate, which is how do you make it in the artwork, how a young artist start being part of this market, and whatever the market is, somehow we're all part of this, and you cannot be an academic or a curator in a big institution or a director of Tate Gallery without somehow being part of the whole thing. I mean, you can be critical, I think you can have some different views, but somehow it's all part of the system. But I think within that system there are also very interesting ways of working and initiatives as well, which for me is really going through the art itself and to artists and young artists making art and having some kind of critical, political activism without being necessarily their first priority. I think the priority is really to make art and through some aesthetics, to some kind of true values, to just then. The thing is, if you look at Gustav Metzger, for instance, who is someone who has always refused to be part of this market.
Well, I don't agree. I completely disagree. I think Gustav Metzger is very much part of the art market.
Well, he's part, no, he refused that sometimes. He's somebody who always lived on nothing. He never made any money to
It's
live.
not just money though, it's power. And he did make power of a very different kind. I think the point you're making, Anne-Sophie, is the really important one, that the whole question's wrong and it needs shifting, because in a sense art is the practice of making value of everything else, rather than looking for what the value of art is. And you because of that, you're never going to come up with a satisfactory solution.
Yeah. Can I just fix on what seems to be a certain shift? When both Wolf and Jane were describing the Michelangelo ceiling, there seemed to be agreement that there was
the ceiling and the disputer. I was talking about the disputer. I was talking about
there was a congruence.
I have to be careful.
There was a congruence between the content of the art as propaganda and its function as propaganda. Now it seems to be, it seems to be agreed here in this panel, perhaps on this panel, that there's a split between those two. That art is used as propaganda, but of course the art itself doesn't have a propagandistic content. To think that would be silly.
No, it does.
But is that split at all plausible?
There's nothing wrong with propaganda. There is nothing wrong with religion.
Jane, you talked about maybe that's...
Sorry.
I'd like to sort of have been misunderstood.
Sorry.
First of all, I don't think that propaganda is necessarily a bad thing. I certainly don't think it's necessary. I don't think you can black and white chop them, separate them North Pole, South Pole. I definitely am interested in the subversive power of Michelangelo within the Vatican. He had the best pitch in art history. He was very aware of changing history around the wheel of Catholicism. I think that I do disagree slightly with the idea that they were. I know that there were Vatican experts and amazing humanist scholars that were advising Michelangelo, but one cannot forget that he was taught by Pico da Mirandola, Marcello Ficino. He was surrounded by the Platonic Five. He read Latin. He was an expert on Dante and so on. Perfectly capable of making his own decisions, which prophecy us and see. But the interesting thing about these artists, I think, is that they took a notion that was the antithesis of what the Vatican ought to be able to appropriate it into itself. Nudity on a monumental scale, that eventually in the Lutheran times was covered up by the patron preachers like Daniel de Volterra. So Michelangelo was a subversive artist. He was a radical artist. But that doesn't mean, as with Sid Vicious, that it's not going to be, in some ways, appropriated or reappropriated again into the society as to be utilised as propaganda. So you can be both. You can be a radical propagandist like Gustav Metzger, and at the same time you can be great for the Serpentine.